Jay Gelati here. It's been my privilege to be the moderator for our past 3 once-in-a-lifetime tech eds over the past 3 or 4 years. We've had John Horseman, Vic Elford, and Derek Bell. Due to the pandemic this year, Hurley Haywood obviously was not able to join us in person, but we are hoping he'll be able to join us in 2021. I hope you've had a chance to view the video that Hurley made for us. It's his personal tour of the new Brumos Museum. If you have not viewed this video on YouTube, which he made specifically for the PNWR, please log into your PNWR account on the PNWR webpage to get the video link. It's embedded in the event posting for the Hurley Haywood Tech Session. So please join me now, and hope you enjoy viewing the recent conversation that I had with Hurley as a follow-up to the video that he made for us.
Well, Hurley, I want to start off, first of all, by thanking you for your time and for being here. I know you would probably prefer to be here in person, and of course, we would much prefer to have you here in person with us. And hopefully we will be able to do that at some point in the future. I think it would be a lot of fun. What I did for this presentation, of course, was review the video. Oh, and I should, of course, thank you for making the video again, showing us the Brumos collection and the museum, which is fabulous. I know a lot of us would love to get there in person at some point when the time is right. I reviewed the video a couple times. We asked our members to take a look at the video, and we asked for questions. I got some questions from members, which I sort of compiled and combined with my own questions. And I just thought what we would do is go through and, just cover the questions that I have. And if we have time at the end, I can fill in a couple more that I thought of. Where I thought I would start is kind of follow in order by the way you went through the museum and touch on some of the cars, in that same order. And the first little set of questions centers around the 935, which has kind of a personal, that car is kind of personal to me because the first sports car race I ever attended in person was at Lime Rock in '79. And I believe Peter Gregg won that race in that exact car, which is kind of cool. That's there in the museum now. We had a little sort of cluster of questions asking you to expand on the driving technique. You touched on it a little bit in the video, but the driving technique for the 935s to kind of get the most out of them, and did that differ much, let's say, compared to other turbo cars?
That's a long answer to that, because everybody had sort of their individual way of driving a 935. It had a lot of horsepower, big wing in the back, big tires. And so you had a lot of different variables on how you drove the cars. So a spectator could stand at the fence and tell who was driving the car just from the style of his driving. Our cars that Peter had, the 935s, and all the 935s that I drove, with the exception of Bruce Levin's car, all were directly from the factory and unmolested. A lot of those 935s had, body work that was not from the factory, from different, manufacturers like Kramer. And Peter was, he said, well, if it comes from the factory, it must be good, so we're going to just leave it alone. He won, 7 championships with that kind of thinking, and so I couldn't really argue with him. And it was a great car. The car that you were talking about was 1979. That was the last championship car. That car never left our ownership, and it's been in the collection ever since. Peter passed away in 1980. So how you drive them is a very personal thing. It's kind of the way that you manage the cars. Because of all of the variables in those cars with the engine configuration, whether it had a single turbo or twin turbos, whether the turbos were sequential or not. They were, and that made a big difference on how you drove the cars. The early cars had a lot of lag to them when those were single turbos. You use those on places like Daytona, where you had to have a lot of horsepower and you had sustained throttles on those cars. And so when you were dealing with a lot of lag on the boost, you had to really go into the corner with your left foot on the brake, and then had your right foot over on the throttle, fanning the throttle back and forth. So by the time you got to the exit of the corner, you had boost built up, so that it took off and launched off the corner. But everybody sort of had their own style of doing that. But that's what you used with those cars, or any car that had turbo lag. And I was good at that with the 935s because of my experience with the 91710. Those cars had twin turbos on them, but there was a lot of lag on those cars. We didn't have the sophistication that the turbos had back in the late 70s. So those were, once you got used to driving those cars, then driving a 935 was no problem.
Good. So, I had one other sort of related question. Is I know Peter's cars were, as you said, the cars that came pretty much from the factory, and I think the one that you have in the museum is actually one of the last that Porsche actually built, if I remember correctly. We had a question about, were all of the 935s that you drove based somehow, some way on actual Porsche built tubs or monocoque unit bodies, or were any of the 935s that you built or that you drove built completely from scratch, either tube frame or without a Porsche, core tub?
Well, all the cars that Peter had were platform cars. They were, from the factory, using the same platform that a regular 911 would use. However, I drove most of the cars that I drove, other than Peter's car, Bob Aiken's car, Bruce Levin's car. All those cars were tube chassis cars. And there was quite a bit the reason we went to build them with tube chassis cars was because of rigidity.
Mm-hmm.
Frames on those cars were very rigid. I remember driving John Paul's car when he had that, his was one of the most radical of the 935s, and you sat basically in the left or in the right seat, and the shifter was on the left.
Oh.
You talk about a weird car to drive. That thing was really weird, but yeah, everybody sort of had their own version. Al Hobart, had the Hobart cars, the Hobart chassis. Those were not tube chassis, but modified monocoque chassis. So
it was a bit kind of a free-for-all, I guess.
It was a free-for-all.
Yeah. And did you notice a big difference between the Porsche built cars and the tube frame, and was it really noticeably better as far as handling and
Well, that's, yeah. In some cases, when you went to a tube chassis car, things were a lot faster in the reaction of the car. So when you would make a move with the car, it was more direct. When you were running a platform car, you had a certain amount of leeway, a certain amount of cushion in the car that made the car driving a little bit easier. But in the end, I think the tube chassis cars were a little bit faster just because of the rigid part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Really rigid is good for a race car.
Yeah, stiffness is good. So working backwards a little bit, had a lot of interest in your 1977 24 Hours of Daytona victory, and a few things that we wanted to clear up, especially because that car is right there in the museum. First of all, the name of the team. I think you might have touched on this in the video, but we wanted to just clear up or explain the name of the team, Écurie Escargot.
Yeah, well, I think I really don't know the answer to that. I just assumed that they were as slow as snails. So they kind of were in the racing business for just surely for the fun of it, the enjoyment of it. And when they asked me to drive with them, you know, I knew that Franz Blum was doing the preparation of the car, and I really trusted Franz. He worked on several cars that I drove in the mid '80s, and I really liked him. And he and I got along really well and communicated really well. And when John Graves and Dave Helmick asked me to drive, I thought about it, and I wasn't really totally convinced that the turbocharged cars really had the history of surviving a 24-hour race. So I said, okay, I'll drive with you guys. And little did I realize that both those guys did not like to drive at night. And you know, the practice and everybody had to drive a certain number of laps at night during the qualifying and all that kind of stuff. So they managed to get through that. But then on race day, you know, when it was getting night, they said, you know, this is going to be up to you. We'll stand by in case you get really tired, but you're going to drive most of the nighttime. I ended up driving an 8-hour shift, and you know, it was completely against the rules. But IMSA kind of figured, well, he's doing a good job. I'd rather have IMSA, from IMSA standpoint, I'd rather have him in the car than John or Dave. And so they, you know, it's kind of looked the other way. And I would come into the pits and I would jump out of the car, and they had a little tent thing built out of blankets. And I would go in there, put on one of their helmets and come back out, and jump back in and take off. So
that story is true about the helmet,
oh,
the
yeah,
helmet deception.
IMSA knew what we were doing, and they were, you know, carefully watching me to make sure I didn't do anything stupid out there. But as I said, they figured it was better to leave me in there than them. So
what's the hardest part of doing 8 hours at night at Daytona? Is it just concentration? Does your vision go?
no, my night vision was really good back then. And you got into kind of a rhythm, a pattern. And once you were sort of in that groove, the time just sort of flew by. You didn't realize that you were in the car for 8 hours. And, you know, you got to remember, you know, you couldn't do 8 hours in a modern race car, impossible physically. Back then it was, you know, it was cool at night. And it was just something that I really enjoyed doing. The one thing you had to be careful was, though, that you didn't get overly tired. Physically, you might be able to do it, but mentally, you know, you were pretty exhausted. You still had to concentrate hard, even though the driving might not be that difficult, but the concentration was just that difficult. So you had to be careful that you weren't losing your concentration. But, you know, it all kind of worked out, and you know, we had a really good result. And it was, I remember very distinctly watching us go up the leaderboard, and you know, that was sort of a little adrenaline shot that you would see you start to creep up on the leaderboard, and that sort of kept me going. So,
yeah, and driving a non-turbo, did that make it a little bit easier for such a long stint?
Yeah, I mean, those RSRs were really fun to drive, and you could, you know, pitch them around, and you can make, you know, small mistakes and not have it so drastic. When you're driving a 935 or a prototype car, you know, you had to be absolutely perfect the whole time, or you were going to have a problem. But But the RSR is a very forgiving car.
Yeah, and your prediction about the turbos turned out to be correct. They all either failed or had big problems during that race, and so you came out on top.
That's exactly right.
Well, speaking of prototypes, my next question goes to the 962 that you guys have in the collection in AJ Foyt colors, and I wanted to see if we could get you to talk a little bit more about AJ and what he was like to drive with, maybe to drive against, what your experience was like with one of the true legends of American motorsport.
Well, that is very true. AJ was a hero of mine, and he was, I said, if I could do what AJ Foyt has done and be so versatile in so many different types of cars, that would make me really happy, and I'd be very proud of that. And so when Preston Henn came down and said, I want you to drive with AJ in the Paul Revere, which is a night race. And I said, really, are you serious? He said, I'm dead serious. So you and AJ get it worked out. And away we went, and we got along perfectly. And I remember, there was quite a lot of difference between AJ's size and my size. The seat in Preston's car was basically fit me perfectly. So you had to sort of jam AJ in the seat. And so I did the first part of the race, and then he was going to finish the race. And so he gets in the car, everything's good. He had a really nice lead that I was able to build up, and he got in, and right away, I mean, he was right on the mark. He was doing everything right. And he faced some pretty big obstacles. Number one, the electrical system kept switching itself on and off. The lights would flicker on and off. And so IMSA was a little bit afraid to black flag him. So he kept on going, and the lights would come on, and they would come on for 15 minutes or so, and then they would go off for maybe a minute and then come back on again. So they were, they said, we'll just look the other way. And AJ and myself won the race, and it was great being in victory lane with him. And he liked that experience so much that when we did the deal, we had a Ferrari that he really liked, and he had the 962. So we bought that car from AJ, sort of not bought it, but traded him the Ferrari for the 962. And then before that, he had myself drive with him. He had Danny Sullivan drive with him, a whole bunch of really good guys. And AJ was always super nice to me. He was always really pleasant and a lot of fun to be around. But when you pissed off AJ, you want to be out of the way. And luckily, I never got him mad at anything, but I saw him. I remember one race very distinctly. We were racing down in Miami when they had, or not Miami, Palm Beach, when they had the race on the fairgrounds. And I forget the driver. He was an Italian driver, big temper, sort of pitched AJ off into the wall and didn't really, damage the car, but enough to get back to the pits on its own power. So instead of going into the pits, AJ drove in. They had this big grassy area, and the turn went around the grass area, and he parked his car facing traffic and was waiting for this guy to come by. And he launched himself and missed him. Not by a little, by a big margin. So he puts it in reverse, backs up, waits for the second time, missed him a second time. And by that time, the IMSA guys were on him. So he was mad.
Yeah, I can't imagine IMSA would have looked too kindly on that if there had been a collision. But no. You and AJ share a distinction, which I believe you're the only two Americans to win Le Mans in your first attempt, which is pretty there aren't many people, period, who have done that. And I think you two are the only Americans to pull that one off. Of course, he only went there once. So I want to ask you selfishly a quick question about the Gulf 917 that you guys have in the collection, which is a car that is close to me also because it's in my book. And I'm just wondering if you've had a chance to drive it yet. And if not, do you think you will get a chance to drive it?
I have not driven it yet, but I will get the chance to drive it at some point.
Okay.
917s before, and it is a spectacular car. But you know, I've had a lot of conversations with Vic Gelford, who was very, you know, prominent in those cars in the day. And you know, when he's asked the question, what is my favorite car, he always goes to the 917. And I know what those cars were like. And in the beginning days where he was racing those, they were scary to drive. I mean, those things moved around on the straight at the Mulsanne, you know, practically the whole width of the pavement. And I was at some event with him, and I looked at him and I said, you know, you must carry your balls around in a dump truck. he just laughed like crazy. And but boy, I'm telling you, you had to really suck it in to drive those cars quickly. They got better toward the end of their life, but those early days with the 917s were quite challenging.
Well, when you do get a chance to drive it, we'll expect a full report and your driving impressions on how it is. It's interesting. The collection has a couple of cars that are very closely associated with Joe Siffert. That one being that's a car that Joe owned personally, the Gulf 917, and then you also have the 908 that Vic and Joe drove together to win the Nürburgring in '68, which is also pretty. And I think that was the very first win for a 908, so that's pretty significant car as well.
Yeah, I think that 908, I'm really excited about driving that car. Those 908s were really beautiful cars, and I remember I got a chance to drive one at Watkins Glen in a vintage race, and it was just a ton of fun. And so I'm looking forward to driving that. But yeah, we're really lucky to have both those cars under our roof. The Brumos collection is spectacular. Those of you that have not been down to see it, the first time you come to Florida, that is absolutely a place that you need to mark down to see. We're not open yet. We should be open by the end of the year once this sort of virus gets under control.
Is the intent of the collection to keep all the cars in running condition so that they can be exercised occasionally?
Yes, everything in the museum is what we call wet. So if you walked up to one and touched it, we would have it running in within an hour. And everything is exercised on a pretty regular basis. We have a rolling dyno, which we put the cars on and run them on that. The worst thing for an old car is to just sit and not be used. So all of our stuff runs.
Well, let me ask you then about your 917, the 91710, which famously I think is the first car to carry what we think of as the Brumos livery with the blue and red striping. Everybody is fascinated by the transition that you had to go through from, basically a production-based car with 300 horsepower to a pure racing car with 1,200 horsepower available at a time in your career when you were still relatively new. And so tell us a little bit more about that. And I know you also got some help from another legend who is Mark Donohue.
Yeah, I mean, if it hadn't been, Peter originally got the 917, and it was not a 91710. He sent it back to the factory after he found, it's not going to be competitive in its condition. It was a Spider, And so he took it back. They took it back and converted it over to 91710. And that car really scared Peter, and he was not comfortable driving it. And so he said, "You want to drive it? You you might like it." So we went out and tested, and it was so from Peter's standpoint, he was really not very helpful on how to get my arms around not only driving a car that had 1,200 horsepower, but also racing against the guys that we were racing against. This was the cream of the crop of the sports car drivers, best guys from Europe, kind of not on the same caliber of the guys from IMSA that I was used to racing against. Great drivers in IMSA, but not at the caliber of these guys that were running in the Can-Am. So Mark was really helpful on getting me, one, adapted to the car, where I was not going to take too big of a step and end up killing myself, and also sort of mentally giving me some pointers on how to deal with guys like Jackie X and Mario Andretti and all these big stars that were running in the Can-Am at that point. And it worked. I was third in the championship. Mark was first. George Fulmer was second, and I was third. So it worked, and it was a very strict box that I kept myself in, and I didn't want to step outside that box. And it was the right thing to do, because a lot of people made really bad mistakes in the Can-Am, and that car had I had a great amount of respect for that car.
And you did have to use the left foot on the brake, I think, to keep the boost up. Was that the first car that you tried left foot braking?
Yes, and something that was completely alien to me. How I'm still when I have to drive a car that I have to left foot brake on, it's just totally messes your equilibrium up. You just not used to that kind of stuff. But in those cars, you had to do it, or you would just be lost. Everybody would pass you. So it was one of those things that you had to adapt to, and once you kind of got the hang of it, it was okay. And it also, those cars, those left foot braking was beneficial not only with the Can-Am cars, but also with the 935s, and then going forward and driving any car that had, like the Audis, you had a left foot brake with the Audi. The Trans Am car and the GTO. So that lesson that I got early in my career really helped me drive cars that I had to use left foot brake. But given my choice, I would never do that.
Yeah, it does seem awkward. Whenever I've tried it, it seems awkward. But I guess after maybe a race or two, you got used to it.
Yeah, you just it was something that you got used to.
Yeah. Well, the last major question I have for you is one that I think I know the answer to, but everybody is interested to know, what is your favorite racing car, which I think, if I know the answer to, is also a Porsche. So why don't we see if I'm correct on that one?
You are. Most of my career has been behind a wheel of a Porsche, so that was a pretty safe statement. Any car that I've won races with is a favorite. Every car in our collection is something that's got a really nice memory to. But if I had to pinpoint what car I enjoyed driving the most, was a 936. That was the car that I won Le Mans with the first year. There were 3 versions of that car. First car I drove was a Martini car, then the Escort, or Escort, I think it was, or
Essex Petroleum sponsor.
That was the second car, and then the last car, which was the most fun to drive, was the Jules car that had the Porsche Indy engine in it. And that was just the reason I liked it was a car that had a lot of characteristics of a 911. You know, you could drive the tail with your foot a little bit, and it had good downforce, but it wasn't glued to the road like a prototype was. It was open, which I like open wheel cars or open cars, and it just proportionally it just was really fun to drive. And I always had great teammates. You know, Jackie Hicks was team with me, and Jurgen Barth the first year, and then second year was Vern Schuppen, who I drove for in Japan, and a really great guy. And who was this third person? Anyway, and then the last time was Mauro Baldi and Yannick Damas and myself in the tower car. So it was that was a great car.
Yeah, I always am a proponent of the 936. I think it's underrated in Porsche's history, first of all, and I just think personally they're really cool and they look fun to drive when you see like Jurgen's famous in-car footage from that 77 Le Mans practice. It just looks like it would be a fun car to drive. So
it had, you know, really good brakes, good power. It was very light and nimble, so you could kind of, you know, toss it around, and it wasn't, you know, going to do anything nasty to you. Where you know, driving a prototype, the window of smile and frown is really, really tiny. So everything could be working really great, and then all of a sudden you step over that line, and boom, really bad things happen. So there was a lot of cushion to that car.
now in 77, when you didn't drive the car before you arrived at Le Mans for practice, is that correct?
No.
So did it remind you at all of your 917 Can-Am car, or did it seem completely different?
The cockpit was very similar to the 917-10, but everything else was different. And I remember when I arrived there, that I'm sure everybody knows the story of, you know, getting lost. And, you know, I saw what Le Mans was like from the TV and from the movie. But I just thought that, you know, Le Mans was just kind of this quaint little town in the middle of the countryside, and got there, and it's a big, huge industrial city. And I got lost, and you know, it was in the middle of the night, and finally I spot this guy who turns out to be my crew chief, and he basically drove me in my rental car to the cathedral, which we had to be there at 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning. And this is where the tech inspection was, and I had to be there. So it was pointless trying to drive, you know, 45 minutes from our location that I found this guy, Klaus Bischoff. It was just a short drive to the cathedral. So I get there, I get in the back seat, go to sleep, and the next day I hear this knocking on the window, and it's Janka Manfred, who's the head of the racing program, saying, "Where the hell have you been? We're nervous about you." So that was my introduction to Porsche. Then the next step was to go to the garage, which was in Teleshay, which was, they worked in, not at the track, but in private garages around the city. And, you know, met all the drivers, got to sit in the car to make sure everything fit, and, you know, brought me up to speed on all the dials and all the things I had to do. And so all of that was great. Everybody was super nice. I got enough, you know, practice in, so I was comfortable with the layout. And they were going to give me the privilege of starting the race. I said, "You guys want to do that?" And they said, "Yep, you're fine." So we're qualified, I think we were qualified third, and go, you know, flying down up into turn one, down through Teleshay, and the throttle stuck wide open on me. And so I've got the whole entire field behind me. So, you don't want to do anything drastic. So I hit the ignition switch, turn the ignition off, and just gradually, drove off the side of the road and got it stopped. And then I'm going, oh shit, now what am I going to do? I can't try to restart it because it's pinned wide open. It'll blow the engine up. So I had to go. I got on the phone, and back then your microphone, you didn't have the sophisticated radios that they now have. So you took this microphone, stuck it under your helmet, and started talking to the pits. So I had to take the rear bonnet off, which sounds easy, but that thing is it's not easy to do. And we had actually trained how to do it. So that was a good thing. Found out where the problem was, got it fixed, put the hood back on, and then took off to the pits. And then I came in, they said, no, don't continue, come into the pits so we make sure that it's fixed right. So that was my introduction to Le Mans and to the 936. And then that made us, at the back, we're now at the back of the field. So Jürgen and myself soldiered on, we were, slicing our way through the field, and Ix's car had a problem. So they decided, well, we'll bring Ix over to your car and he can drive with you guys. And he's like a miracle man at night, and, brought us back in contention. And so that was good.
Yeah, I think Ix, your performance, it's funny, your performance at Daytona in 77 at night is pretty remarkable. But what Ix did at night at Le Mans in 77, I think he drove the equivalent of 5 Formula One Grand Prix races during the night. And I think you guys came back from something like 40th place or whatever. I think you had to pass 40 cars eventually, or have 40 cars either be passed or drop out for you guys to win that race. But yeah, your blood pressure must have been off the scale when the throttle stuck open under those circumstances. I don't know, but I guess you'd had things go wrong in a race car before, so it wasn't your first rodeo. But still, that the pressure of Le Mans, that had to be excruciating in the moment.
I mean, that, people just don't realize the intensity of that race. It's kind of like the same as the Daytona 500 or the Indy 500. You have all these hundreds of thousands of people there. Everybody, they don't have a lot of very good, back then, they didn't have very good crowd control. So they're just surrounding you all the time. You always got a huge mob of people around you. And, there was a lot of tension before the race started. And I remember, just trying to calm myself down, take deep breaths and don't get too panicked. And then, the race starts and the throttle jams wide open. So.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, Hurley, I thought to finish up, we would try a little quick lightning round of questions, quick answer questions, one of which you already answered. I was going to ask you open cockpit or closed. So you voted for open cockpit as your preference on that one. What about turbo or normally aspirated?
Well,
if you had your choice.
I mean, once you got used to driving a turbo car, turbocharging is the way to go. That's where the horsepower is. And a car that is a normally aspirated car really, it doesn't have a really good chance against a turbocharged car. So my preference.
Okay. And is one more fun than the other, would you say, to race?
Well, I think with a normally aspirated motor, you can be more aggressive in the corner. So when you step on the throttle, you've got instant reaction to the car, to what you're doing. where in a turbocharged car back then, there was a lot of delay. So you had to be really careful about how enthusiastic you would get. Nowadays, on a modern car, you wouldn't know the difference between a turbocharged car and a normally aspirated car. The
Right.
technology that's in a turbocharged car now is incredible.
How about production-based car? I mean, you started, had a lot of success in production-based 914, 911, 935 versus a purpose-built racing car like the 917 or the 936 or the 962. Do you have a preference there?
The purpose-built race car.
I kind of figured you'd say that one. How about this? How about Le Mans versus Daytona?
Two very, very distinctly different races, even though they're both 24-hour races. I think the race is harder to win at Le Mans, not because the race is any more difficult. It's just because sometimes the officiating of the race is very difficult to contend with. You can make a minor infraction and you have to come in to the pits, and the scolding that you're getting from the stewards can be a lap lost. Where IMSA, the same infraction, you would have come in, stop, see you later, go, and it would be not a big deal. So I think to take that portion, the driving is the same. You driving 24-hour races. You can't make any mistakes. You never know who's in the car in front of you that you're passing. So all those things are the same. Managing the race, though, is the thing that's more difficult at Le Mans than Daytona.
And so you wouldn't favor one over the other. If you had one last race to do, would it be that would you prefer one or the other of those two?
Well, remember, Daytona's in my backyard.
Not as much travel.
And the France family has been really great to me. So, I would have to pick, if I had to choose a race, I would, pick Daytona. But,
and do you have a favorite track other than those two? Do you have a favorite track of all the many tracks that you've raced at?
I love racing at Watkins Glen. Watkins Glen was my first race that I won with Peter in 1969. And from 1969 to present, I stayed in the same hotel, same room, and the Glen Motor Court Inn is like, I just really love it. It's not the best hotel to stay at, but it's got a lot of the history, and it goes back to the Formula One days. So I love that, and I love the track. I love going up those blue guardrails. It's just it's fast, it's challenging, and I really enjoy driving there.
Yeah, when we had Derek Bell visit us a couple of years ago, he talked about how much he enjoys Watkins Glen as well, because it sounds like it's sort of that combination of a fast-flowing circuit, but also challenging, and not that easy to get perfect.
Yep, that's exactly right. Derek has had a lot of good success there. I've had, I think I almost have the record with eight wins there over the years, but it's just a place where your rhythm is really good. You can get into a really nice rhythm there, and it's just all kind of falls in place.
Good. Well, just to wrap up, Hurley, I want to first of all thank you for your time. We really do appreciate it. I think that I want to talk just quickly about your book and the DVD of the Hurley movie. I believe both are still. I know the DVD is still available of the movie, and I think you folks have a few copies of the book left. Am I correct on that?
That's correct. We have about a little over 100 copies left. So we, would like to sell them. I'll sign all the books for you. You can either order them online at brumoscollection.com, and it's tell me your name and I'll write something nice in there. So that I was really proud of that book. Sean Cridlin did a really great job of putting that all together. The research was great. The photographs were great. The story was great. I think everybody that's read the book said, this is an important piece, especially coming from you. And, so I think a lot of people really were happy that it was written and accomplished. The film is also really super. I love doing that. Derek Dodge did the filming of it. Patrick Dempsey did the help with putting the movie together and helping us sort of bring a lot of different points into a understandable format in the movie. And I think everybody that's seen the movie really enjoyed it. And there's a message in there for everybody to take home.
Yeah, I thought that the team that did the film did a really nice job of balancing the racing piece with the biographical study and kind of blending the two. Of course, being a racing guy, I would have loved to have seen more about your racing career, but of course, that's really what the book does a good job of, is covering a lot more detail on your racing career. So I encourage everybody to, if they don't already have both, they should get their hands on it. And with the book, only a few copies left. I did want to make note of that. Anything else you wanted to cover with us before we sign off and see if maybe we do this again in the future if we get more questions and more interest from our members?
Well, hopefully next year this virus will be under control. There'll be a vaccine and the world will start to open up a little bit. I really appreciate you guys being so accommodating for me. I know that I've talked to John and we had it all set up to come this year and do a program with all you, but it just didn't work. And, I apologize for all the ups and downs, but it'll work out and we'll do it again next year.
Right. Well, we want everybody to stay safe and stay in good health, including you, so that we can get together when the time is right and have one of our fun in-person visits, which we've done now, several of now. And so we'll look forward to that. But in the meantime, as I said, if we do get the interest from our members, we'd love to do the Zoom again with you sometime. And there's lots more questions, lots more things that I would love to chat with you about your amazing career. But thanks again for your time today, and we will talk again soon.
Well, I appreciate it. Bye, everybody. Stay safe and go out and vote.
And yes, that's good. Hopefully everybody will go out and vote. And also, I forgot to mention the new panorama that everybody will now have in their living room. You're now the head chef of the Porsche Club of America. Is that correct?
All the guys can really impress their girlfriends and their wives or their better halves by doing this souffle. Everybody's souffle, but it's easy to make.
Okay. Well, I said to Sean Cridlin on Facebook, I said, okay, I didn't know Panorama was a cooking magazine, but I think everybody's going to have a lot of fun with that. So thanks for sharing your recipe, and we will talk again soon.
All right. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay. Take care, Hurley.
Well, I hope you enjoyed viewing my recent conversation with Hurley Haywood. And if you would like to ask Hurley a question, you can. We're hoping to do another session on Zoom with Hurley sometime in the near future. So if you have a question about Hurley's career or anything based on his book or the film about his life, please email your questions to me at historian@pnwr.org. In November, if we have a second conversation with Hurley, I hope to use your questions. And thanks very much for your support and viewing the videos.